Turn them down.
My writing is.
So 3 o'clock.
I will go back to all of you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting, July 19, 2023. Time is 4 p.m. This meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk.
City Attorney Doctor.
Here.
City Manager Burton.
Here.
Commissioner D. Here. Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Shirtliff.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Reed is excused this evening.
Correct. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Okay, there is going to be an adjustment on our agenda today. We have some guests that we want to put up. So the Ziply franchise agreement will move up to Department Reports Alpha A. And board work session administrative follow-up will move down to Delta. Any questions? Okay. Commissioner comments and questions. Commissioner Logan, you have
Mr. Mayor, thank you. So, as you just mentioned, part of our discussion today is the board's work session. I think it's important to note that since our last board work session, we had, there was some discussion about HCC representation on various advisory boards, and some discussion was had about that, but it wasn't. I didn't think it was. I was entirely clear as to that piece of the discussion, and I guess independently, myself and another member of the commission asked for some clarification from the local government center about the practice that has kind of evolved. And I just wanted to point out, and it is in our packet, that we received some pretty good guidance from them in a letter dated on July 14th, 2023 about the very practice that we had discussed. And I don't know whether, hoping that we can have some discussion about this particular letter. I don't know whether this is the appropriate place or that, in the board's work session discussion, but one of the things that they did mention was that it probably wasn't a best practice, and so they did mention we're at liberty to make whatever decision we want to make, but I think we want to make a good decision, and I think the local government center has provided us some objective experience and relevant information. And so hopefully you've all had the opportunity to look at that. And there were some significant concerns that they brought up with the practice. I guess the first bullet is probably one of the more important, in that advisory boards are created for the purpose of advising the commission on matters defined in the advisory board's purpose per the resolution creating that advisory board. So they are clearly advisory to the commission, and think practice that maybe we gave light nod to in the last meeting, we might want to think about maybe more thoroughly given this updated information. So I'll just leave it at that for right now. But
I hear you. Any other comments concerning this?
Mr. Mayor, I think
Let's see all the highlights.
lots of highlights.
Yeah.
you don't want to go through the rest of
Just
it.
give us the brief.
I would just know, I think the local government center was much more direct and eloquent in describing some of the concerns that I had during the last administrative meeting, so I will not repeat that. But I do think that one of the lines that really summarized my concerns at the last meeting, it says, if a small number of citizens occupy several board seats on the collective advisory boards, there is a risk of reducing the representation for all citizens and eroding the effectiveness of the advisory board structure. The whole reason that we have kind of gone down this path of making the advisory boards more consistent with having consistent bylaws across the boards and trying to expand representation to bring in more diverse and a wider variety of perspectives. The whole purpose of this endeavor has been to serve our community better and for us to be able to make better decisions. And I wholeheartedly agree with kind of this interpretation. And we've never been led astray by a local government center. They really are top notch in terms of advising local government across the state with a lot of different experiences. And I think this memo just further helped me clarify where I think we probably need to be going to ensure that we are getting the most diverse perspectives on all of our advisory boards. And we understand the concerns and recommendations from across the community.
Do you have any other comments? So basically what the local government center said was that they did not advise us on having HCC being represented on the various boards and commissions we have. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So they didn't think it was a good practice. And do we know if HCC has copies of the document we received from local government?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, the local government center's letter of recommendation was in public packet.
Okay, good. Do we have any other comments, questions from commissioners? Presentations. Okay, we all received your presentations, and so let's not belabor these presentations, please. Let's start with the Eric Fever Trail dedication. Parks and Rec Director Smith and Land Sather. You have the floor.
Mayor, Commissioners, our Open Lands Manager, Brad Langseth, is going to give a brief presentation in regards to the proposed trail.
Mayor Collins, Commissioners, thanks for having us here today. The Parks Department Open Lands Division, you may have heard, we had it on Be Heard Helena, is proposing the movement of the Mike Cormier Trail 35 to 40 feet to the north to ensure public access remains viable forever. A previous commission a number of years ago had the forethought to not vacate a portion of Malden Street, which provides access to Mount Helena City Park from the LeGrand Cannon walkway. And so we're going to move, or we're proposing the movement of the Mike Cormier Trail off of a piece of private property and onto a public ownership. Parks Department, Open Lands Division has done our due diligence and had a full title report ran on the Malden addition to ensure that access is viable. And as part of this project, we would also, we're building a new trail, basically. And that trail is going to be about 1,500 feet in length. But the Parks Department would like to go further in honor of former Commissioner Eric Fever. We would like to rename the new trail and name it the Eric Fever Trail. And we would like to continue that trail for a distance of 2,800 feet up to a point that we would like to call the Eric Fever Union. And it's where the trail will union with the Ambrose Trail and the Quarry Trail. And that's kind of, in just a short period of time, became a special place. It's where the Ambrose Successful Trail terminates. And we've found that it's a wonderful place to have school outings because there's a nice flat bench up there. And the kids, as you know, like to run side by side up the trail. So the wider trail facilitates that. And then we have a great place to get them all set down if you can. You got. And I think that that's the spirit of former Commissioner Fever. Ellen Fever is here with us today, and I would think she would agree that the idea of bringing people together at a union of trails and where we're going to have a lot of school events as the years proceed. I've got a map up here that depicts what we're going to do. So this is the Grand Canyons down at the bottom. Oh, my little deal's kind of light's kind of overcoming it. So the red trail is the existing trail that crosses a parcel of private property. And again, we want to move that onto public property, and we've got this unique ability to do that because that street was never vacated, or a portion of it, about 18 feet on one end and a little wider on the eastern end. And then not only will we be able to build a new trail, it'll be a trail that will drain water better and facilitate traffic better. And then we would like to close the old trail and basically have a new beginning for that trail. We're not abandoning the Mike Cormier Trail. All we will be doing is moving the starting point of it further to the east. And then that trail will be signed clear to Carriage Lane and Reader's Village. So in essence, the Mike Cormier Trail will just be relocated slightly. Be more than happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you, sir. Comments from the commission? Madam Fever, I know you wanted to say a few words, so you have the floor.
Well, I'm very grateful for this proposal. Eric really wanted a trails made for him. And there's nobody who used the trails more. 4 seasons, every day. And it's.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this topic? All right, thanks. So, moving forward with this trail, as I was right, consensus.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, just really quickly, before Parks leaves, I just wanted to.
Man, that was fast.
That park down the hall.
Slow down.
I know that there's a lot of planning that goes into multi-years of planning that goes in, and I'm appreciative that you all were able to move quickly on this one. I think this is going to be really special, and I mean, every day I feel like Eric's legacy lives on. I was in a meeting today that was literally a half hour of, well, Eric did this and that also happened, but remember he had this conversation, and knowing that we had this meeting tonight, and I just, had to kind of smile because it was on something that obviously had nothing to do with writing, which he so enjoyed, but had to do with education. And there are so few people who have this kind of impact for this long, and I think it's just really special that hopefully lots of future generations are going to be able to see the trailhead shrine and have a good understanding of the impact that he had on not just this community but the whole state. So, very excited.
So in short, she said, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I guess I'd just like to echo those comments, and this is a great idea. Great tribute. We have one question. How'd you come up with the name Eric Fever Union? Just kidding. That's great, and I know the idea came up quite months back, and it's just a great tribute.
Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor, thank you to our Parks Department, but also to Ellen, glad you're here. Looking forward to making this official. I think it's really fitting, especially with the name Union and for the, with regards to public lands as well, and how avid of a hiker and outdoorsman Eric was, but also too, I love the idea that it's going to be a spot for school kids, and being a former school teacher, I think it's really well done. So hats off, well done. We're glad you're here.
One more thing.
Yes.
My grandson is working on the trails for the city this summer. And he's gotten to work on this particular access or the boundary they marked off today on that lot. And he's thrilled. So thank you.
Okay. We're moving along. Fire Department Master Plan Summary Update. Chief Kendall, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. We have a short presentation on the master plan summary update. And I'll be able to bring that up. In the meantime, I'll note that the master plan summary is in your packets for your review. The appendix to that summary is just a demonstration of how that master plan continues to inform decisions within the organization. And it isn't solely about the recommendations that are of the primary concern that we're bringing to your attention. And with your permission, just to show ongoing dedication to data, the city manager and I have reviewed the year in review for 2022. I'd like to provide you copies of that for your consumption.
Thank you.
Jumping into the summary of the master plan, just the history of some of the issues there. In 2007, a similar undertaking took place, at which time some of the recommendations were 9 additional firefighters, a new fire inspector position, a capital reserve replacement program, response time standard, as well as a station 3 for 2012. Since that time in 2018, we've passed the mill levy, which added 6 additional firefighters, as well as capital improvement plan. In 2021, we had a fire inspector, leaving the 2 major projects around our response time standard and station 3 for the future, which is included in some of the discussion around the master plan summary, as well as the master plan document, which we furnished to you all in May of 2022. Next slide, please. So that recent history master plan was provided to the commission in May of 2022. In August, the commission created the committee to analyze and summarize that master plan. Our 9-member committee met over a 6-month period to provide the executive summary that's in your packets today. The summary focuses primarily in the areas of service level recommendations as compared to service demand on the system, fire station, and staffing model discussions. Current conditions for emergency response over the last 6 years, we've seen about a 4.2% increase in call volume, with a call concurrency approaching roughly 40%. So that's where any given time, if you're to call 911 and need fire department services, about 40% of the time there's another call going on. Now, that does not mean we're not able to go to that call or that we don't have resources for it. That's just a demonstration of the overlap that we experience as a data point. Deeper into that history, in 1979, when Station 2 was occupied and began operating, our call volume was 504 calls. Roughly 4,800 calls for 2022. So a steep incline there as compared to all those years, but a 4.2% increase over the last per year over the last 6 years. Thank you. Again, with Station 2, both of our stations are on the south side of the railroad tracks. So there's no station on the north side. That can be problematic for timeliness of response, depending on railroad status. Station 2, we're working through our budgetary process and capital improvement plan to do some remodeling and updating there. The analytics of response time are going to improve with our new record management system, which we're implementing now, as well as with the computer aided dispatch project through SSD and the police department. Our staffing summary and recommendations. There's a challenge with 24-hour operations. If we have someone sick and we need to operate out of 2 stations, we encountered circumstance where anytime someone was sick or injured, we were in an overtime status to maintain minimum staffing. And that staffing at the time was 9 individuals on shift for a 24-hour period with 3 shifts of 12. The challenge then became it was not feasible to maintain that level of cost for time and a half to maintain that 9. So we've dialed back our staffing to an 8-person staffing for a 2-station model. If we were to add the full 9 FTEs that were recommended from 2006, that would put us in a position to probably maintain that 9-person staffing at a 2-station model. So that was one of our conclusions and level of analysis that was we're summarizing out of the master plan. A 3-station model would then require a total of 15 additional firefighters. Currently at 30, it's roughly 18 per station now, so 36 total. Just as a point of contrast, Missoula is in a discussion around an additional station, and their fire chief is calculating an additional 20 firefighters for that to be successful. So 15 additional FTEs to have a 3-station model staffed out seems to be on par with some of the other analytics that are going on right now. The station in and of itself, 3rd fire station with the training facility, having a training co-located with the station allows for that staffing model to effectively execute and respond into the city where they're not drawing down staffing to locate at an alternate location during training time and hours. We'd like to figure out how to define the funding options for that. One thing that exists currently is some remaining CARES funds, roughly $30-some thousand, and Director Danielson may have a more specific number there, but we'd like to be able to utilize that to help further this project and analysis down the road as appropriate and under the direction of the commission and the city manager. And that's the quickest summary of the executive summary I can provide, unless there's any questions.
Yeah. Comments from the commission?
Yes, sir. So one of the difficulties, I think, in capturing data is just been the capturing response times. And there's just a lot of variability or inconsistency in the way, at least during my time, and I think it's continued beyond that, of capturing of those legs of a response. The improvements that we talked about had an RMS is saying that up pretty well, you think, or?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Logan, I think the data quality has improved substantially within the last several years. And you may take note in the summary of the year in review for last year, which is new information that was just handed to you this evening. We're able to draw from data that's direct input from the firefighters who are logging their response times through their own phones and apps, as well as through the CAD. It will get cleaned up and I think tidier in the future. But I think we have sufficiently actionable body of data where any individual anecdotal point might be subject to additional analysis. it's the body of evidence over approximately or nearly 5,000 calls that gives us reliable averages in terms of what our alarm time to response time is and what our dispatch time is to response time and those traditional metrics.
One additional question if I may. So, again, harking back on my time at the fire department, one of the weaknesses I would say that we had was in the prevention side of things in terms of staffing. The work of inspections and working with plans reviews and things like that. Did the committee consider the prevention side and possibly adding to that? Also with the maybe with the idea of being able to better address from the prevention side the wildfire difficulties that they have there. So I guess in general, what was the committee's, how much deliberation did you have over the prevention side?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Logan, we analyzed some of the data that was included in the master plan just about work volume and demand on prevention as compared to work completed. And that was the definitive analysis is that just as a matter of a quote here, Helena Fire would have to complete just over 1,600 annual inspections to keep up with just the business licensing and occupancy trends within the city. Knowing that the fire inspector is the most recent addition to the organization, I think the next step is to analyze whether that is a sufficient fix to meet this demand and then to redefine what the deficits are. And that's kind of where the issue of the prevention division sits at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Just really briefly, I served on this committee and I learned a ton. I thank the chief for teaching me so much too, because it was one of the more interesting groups that I've gotten to be a part of so far. I think just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight beyond the presentation. As we continue to have these discussions, I would really recommend, especially because there's a very big financial impact that we have to consider as we move forward, for folks to take a look and actually, Chief, if you can maybe hold up the actual findings. A lot of really good information in this master plan, and it's a lot, but it's very much worth your time to review it. And I would recommend that everyone do that given the investment that we'll be looking at. Thanks. Second thing is that I think it's worth noting that when we had the commission and city looked at a similar the last master plan in 2007, it had the same finding that we needed to build a third station. And that one, it said by 2012. We're now over a decade from 2012. And so I think that we were able to move ahead with personnel before, but that third station obviously didn't come to fruition the last time we did this. So I just want everybody to walk away from this knowing that the conclusion, and it's the first line in the conclusion in this executive summary, is that the strategic planning committee recommends adding a third fire station and training facility. One of the pieces of the discussion really was, what does this look like in the next 30 years too? So I think to keep in mind that we are now, well, Capitol High was 6 years old when the last station was built and open. And so we need to be thinking about what is going to be happening, 30 and 40 years from now, and what facilities do we need to be investing in now to ensure that we are in a good place 20, 30, 40 years from now. And then the final piece, and I heard, and the mayor was found it interesting too, 504 calls as the annual call volume when the second station was built in 1979. 2022 was 4,851. We obviously know our community has been growing and changing. And if anyone sits at the railroad tracks, even once a day, I always worry about, what happens one day when there's, a significant event, and our two stations are obviously on the south side of the tracks. And so I think us thinking about what this looks like as growth continues north of the city, as more people ask to be annexed in north of the city, this conversation is going to become really important. It's obviously very high ticket item. And so I think that ensuring that we have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed will be important. And looking forward to more opportunities to talk about this important project.
Any other comments from the commission? Julie? Oh,
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Chief Campbell, for this. Looking at the numbers, it's staggering. As Commissioner Dean said, going from where it was in 1979 all the way up to close to 5,000 calls. You divide that by two stations, that's a lot of work per year. And then if you had a third station, it makes it a little bit more sustainable. But I believe it's an expense that we have to look at as a city as we grow. And to add a training facility, I think that adds a lot more value. I think that adds a lot of opportunity, whether to partner with our state and federal partners, fire departments across the state. I had the opportunity to go to the Fire Ops 101 in Boise, learned a lot there, and saw the amount of folks that go to that event or into that facility. I think that having something that's made in Helena, us being centralized, I think it'd be, I think it's something we should take a good hard look at. So thanks for putting this together. I appreciate it.
Manager Burton?
Thank you, Mayor. As you well know, this is a service level discussion. As Commissioner Dean mentioned, we'll be looking 20, 30, 40 years out as to what service we need to provide for the residents of the city. I always look at basic problem solving model in terms of identifying the problem, defining the problem, which is what that master plan does. We'll look forward over the next several weeks and months for direction from the commission on what kind of options you want us to put together for your consideration. And once we get through the option discussion, then the commission makes a decision, we implement, monitor, and adjust. So this item is going to be around for a while. Good. It's going to be a lot of data for you to digest. I look for direction. We look for direction from the commission as we look at various options. We'll work with the city PIO to put something on the commission website relative to all of this data and the fact that you're having the service level discussion. And we'll be done when we're done.
Okay. And I know in 2018, the fire department, along with that was the first thing I remember them bringing forward to me was the safer grant. And we jump all over it because we thought it was a fiber grant. It would help the city. So I know there are grants out there. Let's start looking, let's start exploring to see how best we can start the process, because I see Helena expanding. I mean, when I drive going to East Helena and look up that Mountain View Meadow, you think you're out of Helena, but that's Helena. And so that goes also for the police. We got to start looking at how do we manage this. When you go up on like Brent, that subdivision that's going up there, we're not slowing down. I don't know for the better or for the worse, but whatever it is, we're not slowing down, and we need to provide services to those locations. So yeah, I hear you. Thank you. All right. Any public comments on this topic? Okay, thanks, Chief. Thank you. We are moving along. HPD staff and study report. Chief Petty and or Representative Freemeyer.
Tim Freemeyer.
Freemeyer.
Yep. We'll get the computer up and running.
I'll have him sit here. We can hear him. He's got a device where he can control the computer because I don't want Danae to yell at us. Again. Mayor, Commission, Mr. Tim Friesmeyer did our staffing study. It's been about a year in the works. You can see the attached report in your packet. If you were like me and read that the first time, I had to take out my contacts and get back after the second time. But there's a lot of numbers, a lot in there. And I think Mr. Friesmeyer did a good job in summing it up in this PowerPoint. We will try to keep it brief, but there is a lot of information and then we can discuss after that. I'll let Mr. Friesmeyer take it over here.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for your time today. This, as the chief said, has been a 12-month study. We've looked at over 1 million different records from the CAD data over the last 6 years. So I'm going to try to boil that down into about a 3,000-foot overview that we can fit into a 30-minute time frame. So bear with me as we fly through this. Okay, it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose, to be quite honest with you. So we'll start off with the project scope. The scope contains several questions. First, what is the appropriate staffing level for the police department? The second aspect of that scope was, what does the current staffing compare to recommended staffing levels? Then what short-term improvements could be made in the form of beat optimization for the deployment of the officers and also schedule optimization. Is the schedule the most appropriate for the workload that's coming into the police department by day of the week and hour of the day? And what improvements might be able to be made there? And then finally, what other long-term improvements in the way of additional data collection or anything else that needs to be done might be suggested? In order to do this, we followed what's called the PAM model, the Police Allocation Manual. It is the most recognized model for staffing in patrol divisions across the country. I use this with the International Association of Chiefs of Police when I taught from Northwestern University. It's the definitive model. It's based on 6 years of historical CAD data from 2017 through 2022 here in Helena PD. It's based on 6 years of historical leave data provided by your HR department, your payroll department, looking at how much vacation time, sick time, training time was done, which overtime was worked by every officer in patrol. It's based on current patrol division schedules. Now, as we look at the annual patrol activities, I need to define that we can look at several metrics here. One of those is the number of calls for service coming in, but it's just a number. It doesn't tell us how much time that takes. The second metric is to look at the average hours of reactive time that the police department faces. And that's a much more predictive metric for us to be looking at, is the average time. We don't want to do comparisons such as benchmarking because that says nothing for the number of people that actually commute into the town the police department has to provide service for. So when we talk about hours of reactive time, it doesn't matter if it's a commuter or a resident of Helena, it's hours spent by the police department. And this is how the number of activities compare over the last 6 years, and then using a linear regression model to forecast what we think the annual calls are going to be going forward. You can see how 2020 and 2021 had an effect, and it brought everything down, which reduces that forecasting. Now, every call that the officers go on, we define in this method as either proactive or reactive. Now, it's easiest to define proactive activities. Those are activities that the officers do in between calls for service. So when they have a little bit of downtime and there's not calls holding for them to respond to, they may run routine traffic. They may go check the local parks. They may do foot patrol in the downtown business area, community policing type of activities. Those are proactive activities. Anything outside of that is considered reactive. Reactive things would be domestic disturbances that they respond to, burglary calls, alarm calls, DUI enforcement, any criminal traffic enforcement we consider to be a reactive activity. Now, this staffing study is based on the hours of reactive time. And then we build in time for them to do their proactive enforcement. Now, that reactive time we refer to as M sub R. It's in minutes of reactive time per hour. M sub P would be the minutes of proactive. When we look at just the annual reactive hours spent, we see a slightly different picture. The reactive time went down in 19 and 20, and then in 21, it spiked back up again. In 22, it spiked back up again, which means there might not have been as many calls for service or patrol activities, but the time they were spending was longer on those activities. And then, of course, we see the forecasted estimate for the next 6 years. Now, if we take 2023, which you saw in this previous slide of 19,300, that's the anticipated number of hours of reactive time for this particular year. If we divide that by 365 days a year, we see that they're going to have to do an estimated 53.02 hours of work on average per day. If we take that amount and we divide it by the shift length minus the administrative time per shift. Now, each time an officer comes into work, we lose half an hour for briefing. We lose half an hour for a meal break. There's 2 15-minute breaks in there. They have to refuel the squad car. And there's a 10 to 15-minute time at the end of the shift that they have to turn in paperwork and turn in gear. So on a 10-hour shift, you don't really get 10 hours of patrol time. You get about 8.1 after you take away that administrative time. So when we divide the 53.02 hours of average time per day by the shift length minus that administrative time, we find out that we actually have to field. Now, here's your administrative time. That's roughly 1.9 hours per work per shift. So every time they come into work, you're giving up 1.9 hours of administrative time. So if we divide the 53.02 hours per day by the shift length minus that administrative time, you find out that we have to field 6.56 units per 24-hour period. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's the bare number of officers that you can get by with running call to call for the entire length of their entire shift, just answering reactive activity. There's no community policing taking place. There's no traffic stops. There's no proactive enforcement whatsoever. So we can't stop there. Now, this gives you an idea of what to look for in forward years. Right now, we're at 6.56 minimum units per day. That's going to move up to 6.9 or 95 minimum units per day by the time we get to 2028, if the linear forecasting is correct. Again, it assumes officers have no proactive time and no call irregularities. Now, the previous calculations, again, use only reactive time. Every agency needs some amount of proactive time in there. Why do you need proactive time? Well, you're going to burn your people out, right, if you're running reactive continuously. In addition to that, there's some other metrics that happen. We want to be able to reduce cross-beat dispatching, which means you're sending an officer out of one beat into somebody else's beat to handle their call because they're tied up. When that happens, it lengthens your response times. It also reduces officer safety and citizen safety because many of those cross-beat dispatches, officers are running lights and sirens. And that's one of the most dangerous situations running across town. So we want to keep those officers in their areas. By adding in proactive time, we reduce patrol intervals. That's the average time that a stranded motorist will sit in your city before an officer comes by on routine patrol. So if somebody were to come into Helena and they had car trouble, they didn't have a cell phone, and they just waited for an officer to come by, how long would that take? Well, for the average agency, it's about 24 hours, believe it or not, when you average that off across the entire city. But when there's no proactivity whatsoever, that number goes to infinity. That person will sit there forever because officers have no proactive time to try to react to that. It also reduces the probability of saturation. Probability of saturation is the probability that when the next call for service comes into the dispatch center, there will not be an officer readily available to handle that call. And that call will have to go on a stack waiting for an officer to become available. As your minutes of reactive time get closer and closer to 60, in other words, your proactive time goes away, all three of those values increase exponentially. So your performance falls apart exponentially as your minutes of reactive time goes up. That's why it's important to have the right amount of proactive time. Now, when we look at recommended officers per day, I've been doing this, I've been teaching this for 28 years. I've been doing studies across the country for 19 to 20 years now, full-time, doing nothing but these studies. I always try to get agencies to a 30-30 split of proactive and reactive time, if at all possible. In other words, out of the average patrol hour, we want the officer to have 30 minutes spent on reactive time and 30 minutes spent on proactive time. That gives them a chance to get ahead of crime, to notice things that are going on in your community, to try to stop the little stuff before the little stuff becomes the big stuff, if that makes sense. Now, that's been my recommendation. I used that same recommendation with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Also, when I did studies with Northwestern University, with Michigan State University, it's always been that 30-30 split if possible. Now, in order for the city of Helena to get to a 30-30 split, you would have to field 13.2 officers per 24-hour period. That's for 2023. That number will jump to 13.52 in 2025 and 13.68 in 2027. Now, we're not quite done yet because that's 13.32 officers on the street every day. In order to keep an officer on the street every day, there's another multiplier that takes place called the shift relief factor, because officers have days off throughout the week. Officers have vacation time, sick time, leave, training, all that other stuff. So the shift relief factor takes into account 4 categories: regularly scheduled days off, benefit time off, shift exceptions, and net compensatory time. And this was the data gathered from HR and from payroll internally from training. So this is based on 6 years worth of data. In order to calculate the shift relief factor, we basically take 365 days a year times we're calculating, regularly scheduled days off. We take 365 days a year times their 3 days off, because they're on a 4-on, 2-off schedule. And we divide that by the number of days in the cycle. In essence, on a 4-3 schedule, which is what Helen is currently working, they get 156.4 regularly scheduled days off per year. Multiply that times 10, that's 1,564 hours they're away from patrol as a result of their regularly scheduled days off. When we looked at benefit time off, this is the average hours of benefit leave used in each category by the average patrol officer over the last 6 years. So the average officer has 387.9 hours off patrol in the various forms of benefit leave. This is all contained in the report that you have. These are shift exceptions. Shift exceptions are things that officers do during a normal day's work when they're not answering calls for service. So basically, it's other activities in lieu of a day of patrol. The primary one here is training. Officers spend 97.7 hours on average per year in training in lieu of a normal work day. And when we look at overtime, the average officer works 37.84 hours of overtime per year for comp. They work an average of 163.45 hours of overtime for pay in the average year. When we put all that into a shift relief factor, we see that we have 1,564 hours off for regular days off, 387.9 hours for benefit time, 97.7 hours in shift exception. The overtime that is worked is time not taken away, but put back into the street. So we subtract off the overtime that's being worked. And we come up with an average time off patrol per year of 1,848 hours, including their regularly scheduled days off. We subtract that from 365 and then divide 365 by that number, and we get a shift relief factor of 2.03. What that means is that in order to staff one position on day shift every day of the year, we have to have 2.03 officers on the patrol division. Make sense?
Yeah. Say that once more.
In order to put one unit out in the field on day shift every day of the year, you have to have 2.03 officers on the patrol force in order to staff that unit.
Thank
you. Okay, so if we move forward, the shift relief factor for a 10-hour shift normally falls between about 2.05 and 2.10. For Helena PD, it was 2.03. My assumption is the amount of overtime that's being paid is probably why that's lower than the average. When an officer works comp time, you pay now or you pay later. You either pay right up front and it hits the overtime budget, the police department, or they work overtime, they take it in comp, and you pay later when it comes time for staffing studies, because you find you need more people because you're paying that overtime with time off later. You pay now or pay later. And because the officers are averaging over 100 hours each in overtime, that's probably why that shift relief factor is a little bit low of the normal range. So if 6.56 minimum officers need to be fielded per day, and we want to keep a 30-30 split, that converts the 6.56 to 13.12. If we need to field 13.12 units every 24-hour period, and it takes 2.03 officers on staff for each one of those units, we have to have a total of 26.58 officers on the patrol division. in order to staff 13.12 per day to keep them at an average of 30 based on the CAD data. Several multipliers at play here. From 2017 through 2022, an average of 10.34% of all patrol staff were in field training for the academy. So when we say that we need 26.58 officers, those are fully trained officers that are able to go out in the field and work on their own. Since the agency has an average of 10.3 in training at any given time, we have to elevate that number. So we have to increase the staffing number in patrol to 30.02 officers in 2023, so that out of that 30.02, we can keep 26.58 fully trained and able to answer calls on their own. Make sense so far? Okay. I said it's like drinking from a fire hose here. From 2017 through 2022, the average turnover rate for the patrol division was 29.53%. Patrol is the front door for the police department. Every time somebody leaves in the organization, they get promoted, but they promote out of patrol into the specialty position. So every time somebody leaves, you have to fill back through that front door through into patrol. So to keep 30.02 officers on staff in patrol so that 26.58 are fully trained and able to handle the workload, the agency has to be prepared to onboard an additional 12.6 officers throughout the calendar year. And that's the number that's expected to churn through in order to keep that 30.02 fully trained or fully staffed. Here's what the numbers look like, assuming a 30-30 split, which is where I always recommend agencies to be. In 2023, we're at 30.02 is the recommended number. In 2025, that'll jump to 31. In 2028, that'll jump to 32. So as we look 3 to 5 years down the road, that's the expectation if things stay the same. Now, I have to tell you, this is the first time we've initiated a data-driven allocation in the police department. So once the police officers understand that this is driven off data, hopefully they'll be a little more conscious in documenting everything they do. A lot of times officers will pull off to the side of the road and they'll write a report, but they won't go on to CAD because they don't want somebody else coming into their area to take their call. And so in order not to can't find the right word, in order to be fair to their fellow officers, they'll write those reports under the radar. They'll also do a lot of follow-up, and this happens across the country, where officers will go back to a location and they'll do follow-up. They'll check the alleys of a burglary. They'll do whatever but they do it under the radar. They don't call out because they don't want to show unavailable on the screen. So we have to encourage the officers, if you're working, take credit for the work that you're doing. Call that out so we can properly document the work. I have no doubt that the 6 years of CAD data that we analyzed is going to be underreported data, based on the fact that they just didn't see the need for calling out everything that they're doing. It's also very common in agencies, if an officer gets sent to a fight call, they'll show up on the scene and nobody's fighting, they'll clear that call. And then they'll stay there for another 5 to 10 minutes driving around looking to see if anybody's in the area. They're working it, but they're not getting credit for it in the CAD. So those numbers could very well increase, and I anticipate that they will. All right. Replacement timeline. It's important to talk about this because you can't just hire somebody on a Friday and expect them to show up to work on Monday. The timeline for new recruits in the police department, once the hiring process starts, it's 2 to 3 months by the time you go through background investigations, psychological exams, physical testing, drug screening, interviews. And once you get them hired, you can get them into the academy. You're looking at a 7-month or 480-hour training academy. It's a 12-week period.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Would that be the same for officers transferred from a?
It would not. And that's where we get down to the third major bullet point. The training process for certified lateral candidates goes from 7 months to 3 months. So it does get shorter, but we're still looking at potentially 6 months, even for a lateral candidate, before you can get them out on the street answering calls on their own. They do have to go through a Montana equivalency, which is a 1 week. They also still go through an abbreviated field training program so that they're trained in how Helena PD handles activities. So there's still some time commitment there. Okay, so as we talk about how many people does the police department need, in 2023, they need a full-time staff, a full authorized position of 30 officers in patrol to get to that 30-30 split based on the CAD data. And then they need to look forward to bringing on 13 to 14 additional officers throughout the year as turnover takes place within the organization. How does current staffing compare to the recommended staffing levels? Here's the current staffing for the PD. This is as of about 3 days ago. You'll see that in patrol operations, there's 5 sergeants, 3 corporals, 20 officers, 3 unfilled positions, 4 trainees. So as we look at just patrol operations, you have 32 people in patrol operations right now, 4 patrol sergeants, a training sergeant, 3 patrol corporals, 18 patrol officers, a K-9 officer, a DUI officer, and 4 trainees. Now, as we look at call takers, sergeants should not be call takers. It's like expecting people to run the concession stand as well. You want the lifeguard on the chair. With your sergeants on the street, you want them to be available for supervising, especially with the turnover rate and as many young officers are coming into the department, you want those supervisors to be able to supervise. So we do not count them as call takers. That leaves our corporals, our 18 patrol officers, and our 1 K-9 officer. So that brings us to 22 patrol call takers as of 3 days ago. You need to be at 30. Now they have 4 people in FTO status right now. Once those 4 people come out of FTO, that 22 will go to 26. They have 3 vacancies. Once they can fill those vacancies, that will get them to 29. So right now, it's not an issue of trying to authorize a large number of additional positions for the police department. It's trying to fill the positions they have and get people out of that FTO status. Assuming 22 patrol call takers in patrol and a forecasted reactive workload, the patrol call takers are currently estimated to be spending 40.93 minutes per hour on reactive workload. Again, we want to be at a 30-30 if possible, and they're spending 40.93 on reactive. So at the present time, yes, the Helena Police Department is understaffed to handle the reactive workload and keep that 30-30 split, keep the quality of life that the city of Helena is looking for. Part of that is because of the inability to fill those 3 positions, 3 vacant positions, and waiting on those additional FTO to come out of FTO status. To reach recommended staffing levels, they need 26.58 fully trained call takers. Currently, the patrol division has 22, and they need an additional 4 officers in the field training program. They have 4 in the field training right now. And then to account for turnover, they need to be able to bring on an additional 12 throughout the year. All right, I'm going to have to move quickly because I'm running out of time, and we've only talked about 1 of 3 parts of this study. Second part is what short-term improvements can be made. And at the present time, the Helena Police Department does not have a designated beat structure throughout the city. The officers are put out into the field and they're sent to calls based on a rotating list that's held at the dispatch center. So when the next call comes in, the next person on the list gets sent to that call, regardless of what part of the city they may be in. So it could lead, the present system could lead to long response times if the person's on the east side of town and the call that they get out of the queue takes them to the far west side of the town. If an officer is unavailable, the incoming call goes to the next officer on the list. I'm not saying this is taking place in Helena. I don't know that it is, but in other agencies, that type of system can be gained very easily. If an officer sees a call coming in on the CAD, they'll pull traffic, and now that call goes to the next person on the list. So there's chances for that to be abused if it's not monitored closely. So there's definitely a need for a beat design for the city of Helena. It reduces the need for holdover overtime. It reduces that probability of saturation. It reduces the cross-beat dispatching. It equalizes workload for the officers, and the officers get better familiarization with an assigned beat. So in order to do that, I'm proposing a 12 sub-beat plan across the city. The reason I choose 12 sub-beats is it's a superior highly composite number, meaning you can divide 12 by 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6. So once you set up 12 sub-beats, you can create six beats with 2 sub-beats in it, 4 beats with 3 sub-beats, 3 beats with 4 sub-beats, or 2 beats with 6 sub-beats, however you want to divide it up. So the workload is equitable. Most of the proposed individual reporting areas follow major streets and natural boundaries, and the IRAs are very small. There's 392 individual reporting areas that I created across the city. And it looks like this. Each one of those polygons is an individual reporting area. And those are in your report also that you have a copy of. After I created the polygons, I went back and I mapped in all of the calls for the last 6 years by latitude and longitude to determine exactly how many hours of reactive work occurred in each one of those polygons. Once I determined how much work there was in each polygon, then I started lumping them back together. So each one of these dots was a call for service over the last 6 years. Then they were lumped, those small individual reporting areas were aggregated back together based on the amount of reactive workload in each area so that we could create 12 subbeats that have equal amounts of reactive workload inside each subbeat. Make sense so far? And this is the 12 subbeats that we came out with. Now, see, subbeat 1 through 6 starts at the top and goes counterclockwise around the outside. 7 through 12 is on the inside and goes counterclockwise back around. This is how the subbeats add up. So roughly 8.33% was what I was targeting in each one of those 12 subbeats. They look like this by the time we're done. The variance between the heaviest subbeat and the lightest subbeat is 0.27% among those. So you can break those up any way you want. As long as you break them up evenly among the officers, the workload becomes equitable. This is the 6-beat plan. So you just combine 2 subbeats together to form 6 beats. This would be the 4-beat plan if you wanted to field 4 officers. This would be the 3-beat plan. And it's just different ways of adding together those 12 subbeats to keep the workload equitable. The last part was schedule optimization. We looked at the current schedule. Officers work a 4 on 3 off 10-hour schedule. Days off for each watch are distributed across the week, which creates a lack of both team integrity and unity of command. Team integrity means when they come into work, they report to the same supervisor every time. That's not the case right now because you have to have a sergeant and a corporal on every shift. And depending on your days off, you'll report to multiple people throughout the week. Team integrity means every time you come into work, it's a different group of people you're working with because of people's days off are falling across the 7 days of the week. Officers bid their shift and their days off every 6 months based on seniority. This creates a lack of schedule equity. So a new person to the agency is not going to see day shift for a while, and they're probably going to have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off for the first several bid periods until they get enough seniority to be able to get a weekend. Folks with Gen Z, they're not going to wait 2 to 3 years until they get a weekend off. They're going to find another agency somewhere else to go to. So this is very difficult to recruit with a schedule like this when you're lacking team integrity, unity of command, and schedule equity. Shift assignments are not correlated to the workload. In other words, the number of people assigned to each shift is somewhat equitable across the 24 hours of the day, but your workload doesn't come in the same across the 24 hours of the day. So we need to actually try to match the staffing to when the calls for service are coming in. So what we look at in a good schedule is unity of command, team integrity, schedule equity, training compatibility, if at all possible. We want to look at the risk of fatigue to the officers, and we want to look at how efficient that is to the workload curve of the organization. Now, this is the current staffing curve. You'll notice that the numbers differ by day of the week because of people's days off. It's not consistent scheduling. This is the workload curve for the agency. It bottoms out at the same time every day at about 5 o'clock. And during the weekday, it maxes at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Saturday and Sunday is considerably lower than the other 2 throughout the days of the week. But throughout the weekday, very consistent, which means we can use a rotating schedule that gives us uniform staffing and still be efficient to where we need to be. This is the workload curve by day of the week. Their lowest day is Sunday at 11.07%. Heaviest day is Thursday at 15.28%. So this is the current workload curve. Now, again, we measure efficiency by the closest of fit of those 2 lines. In order to have a very efficient schedule, we'd like those 2 lines to sit right on top of each other, but they never will because the workload changes by 15-minute increment and staffing only changes when the shift comes on duty or goes off duty. So at the present time, this is the current efficiency, and it's at 64.37% efficient. Now, where that number comes from is we take the absolute value of the difference between those 2 lines, sum it across the 24 hours of the day, and subtract it from 100%. So the more deviation of those 2 lines, the lower the efficiency is going to become. Right now, it's at 64.37. The first thing we can do is try to optimize the current schedule. So in order to get rid of these problems, optimizing is still going to give us a lack of schedule equity, a lack of team integrity, a lack of unity of command. It's still going to give us fatigue for the night shift. but it might improve efficiencies a little bit. So by moving people around on the schedule, we can get up to 75.81% efficiency just by changing the number of officers assigned to the teams to match the staffing to the workload. Still doesn't solve the other issues with the schedule. The next step is to look at alternative schedules. This is one alternative schedule that we see a lot in the Northwest. It's a 10-hour and 40 minutes shift that the officers work 5 days in a row. And there is a fatigue issue to that. And so I proposed it, but I would not recommend this particular schedule. I'm going to move past it. The one that I do recommend is the 12-hour pitman rotation. This is a 12-hour shift where the officers work 2 days on, they take 2 days off. They work 3 days on, they take 2 days off. They work 2 days on, they take 3 days off. It's called the 2-2-3-2-2-3 schedule, and this is what it looks like. So you take your start times, let's say if at 6 of your officers that start at 6 o'clock, half of them start in week 1 and half start in week 2, and they work each other's days off throughout that 2-week period. This gives you complete team integrity, gives you complete unity of command, it gives you complete schedule equity, and it increases your efficiency rating to 77.49. And you can see how those two lines match up much closer than what they do in your current schedule. Now, this is a significant change from what the officers have done. Currently, they're working 4 10s, and now we're looking at a 12-hour shift without fixed days off. So change is hard for law enforcement agencies, but this would be my recommendation to the police department. Also, on that third workday on Sunday in week 1, if you convert that from a 12-hour day to an 8-hour workday, and each of the 3 shifts, instead of working 12s, work 8-hour days, it takes you right to a 40-hour work week. And the most you ever work is 2 12s and an 8. So that's another option. All right. I'm out of time, so I need to jump to my last improvements. Long-term improvements, obviously, we need to get up to that 30, if at all possible, and find a way to retain the people that you have. That's probably one of the bigger issues. Between 2017 and 2022, the Helena Police Department onboarded 39 new employees. During that same 6-year period, 1 officer passed, 7 officers retired, 7 recruits failed the training phase, and 24 officers left for other employment, for a net gain of 0 officers in the last 6 years. We need to do something for the retainment to try to keep people there. Staffing shortages is something we're seeing across the country right now. It is not unique to Helena. If you look at other agencies, they're offering massive sign-on bonuses for police officers. They're giving take-home cars. They're doing all sorts of things to try to attract people. And social media is not helping us. The law enforcement career is not that sought-after career that it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. Recent efforts at defunding, I can go through this whole thing, but there's a myriad of reasons why people are just not going into law enforcement anymore. And what used to be a hiring list, when I tested on in 1990, there were 500 people that showed up for 3 openings. Now you test with 5 openings, you're lucky to get 6 people. So it's just a completely different game. To recruit and retain staffing, the agency should strive to create an attractive environment, which includes competitive wages, which I believe you already have, reasonable and equitable workloads. So by modifying the work schedule, creating a beat schedule, we can do that. A favorable work schedule that's going to give them some weekend time off. And I hear this a lot, is a feeling of appreciation and respect from whom they serve, both internally and externally. They have to know that the police department has their back and that the city has their back. That's huge to officers right now. These are just recruitment efforts. The agencies have taken the sign-on bonuses, attractive patrol schedules, take-home vehicles, shift differentials, which you've been doing for years. And unfortunately, we saw in Memphis not too long ago, some agencies are lowering their hiring standards, and that becomes catastrophic. It's not something that I would recommend. A couple other accounting things. One, better collection of unreported or underreported workload is one of the recommendations. And as that happens, you may see that workload increase in future years based off of what the forecasted numbers are. Training for all employees on the method and need for consistent documentation. And you'll read in the report about a new CAD identification scheme that's recommended. So it's easier to identify officers in the CAD data based on an ID that says rank and position as opposed to a badge number. So, and I'm sorry, I've run over my 30 minutes, but there's a ton of information in this. And when you read the report, it's pretty thick. I appreciate your time on that. What questions, man?
Comments from the commission?
Well, Mr. Mayor, the presentation was actually very helpful in digesting what I had read, so thank you.
I said that today.
It took me, I go through the times. One of the things, and I guess this is just, so you talked a little bit about, we're actually not that far from what the recommendation would be of the 30 officers, but I guess what do we do, and maybe the chief can answer this too. I mean, do we think there's going to be consistently that gap if we don't increase the number, like hire on a lot more officers to decrease that delta, even though they're not all going to be utilized? Or I guess maybe that's not a good way to phrase the question, but
It used to be 30 years ago that the biggest hurdle was getting funding from the city to hire. There were plenty of people wanting to come to work. The harder part now is trying to find those officers. If you were to authorize 10 additional staff for the police, I don't think they'd be able to find 10 additional people in a year's time to pass the background checks to hire on. It's a huge challenge. Chief, I may be wrong.
No, one thing Mr. Friesmeier showed in the presentation was that net zero. Right now we're at 55% or 5 years plus. 55% of our departments has 5 years or more, and only 45% 22 officers with 0 to 5 years. So we're at that split. We're doing a good job, kind of, with that retaining, but where we're losing those folks is at 0 to 3 years. They get into this career and go, it's not a career, it's not the profession for me. I tried it, but I'm moving on. And the mayor made mention of when we were talking about laterals, people that are already post-certified coming in, and we're currently open for laterals right now. But one of the things we found hiring laterals, we had a gentleman come in from another state. He lasted 3 weeks after he signed in. We put this onboarding time, all the tests that you got to run everyone through, that 2 to 3 months. It was 3 weeks. We hired another gentleman out of Oregon. He was 2 months. I guess where I'm going with that, without talking about all those folks, one thing we see from laterals is they come in and go, oh, this isn't retired on duty. Helena, Montana is a busy place. There's a lot of patrol work that we got to do. And one thing that we do when they come here is you're working patrol. If you were a certain position, that doesn't transfer over, because we need you to work as a Helena police officer. We want you to be a Helena police officer. It's very important where you came from, but you need to learn how we do business here. And I think that's hard to do. And I think once folks that are seasoned and see that, they're like, yeah, you're actually busier than I thought you were. So I'm going to try something else. I got to Montana, so that's good. Now I'm going to go somewhere else. I did not answer your question.
no, that's, well, and this is my last question. I think, I mean, obviously this is like the third part. This is not the last conversation we're going to have. So I'm anxious to learn more eventually about what it looks like if we do like pursue the sub-beat strategy, and also the shift strategy, and what the feedback would be. My other question is too, and this is maybe just food for thought. I mean, like millennials and Gen Z, I think the average is you'll have upwards of a dozen careers in your lifetime. And I mean, it's a lot of professions that are experiencing this that require a lot of training, teachers, nurses, things that you think are careers that normally or traditionally people would do for a lifetime, are not necessarily pursuing that anymore. So when we are thinking like 20, 30, 40 years in the future, how often is there going to be someone who stays with the police department for a solid 20 years? And so how do we solve for that, so we're not constantly kind of in this crisis of turnover?
There's a lot of people across the country that are asking that same question. But one of the things they're finding with Gen Z is Gen Z doesn't necessarily see retirement as an option. They see that their parents are not able to retire now. They're going back to work in their 50s and 60s. So the Gen Z says, we're never going to retire. So we want a good work-life balance right now.
Yeah.
Which means give them some weekend time off, give them time with their family, allow them to do things other pursuit. And more than anything, they want to know that the police department, the administration, and the city is concerned about their well-being. And if the city and administration can show them they're concerned about the well-being, you stand a much better chance of retaining and attracting those younger officers. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different from those of us that are older. So filling those 3 positions, once those get filled, and if you can reduce some of that turnover through a more attractive schedule, more attractive benefits, I think that's a win-win. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
And I think where we go from here is we look at the methodology that Mr. Friesmeier presented, and we go the route of the optimization of the schedules. I mean, even with the current 410 schedule that we have right now, if we move some officers around, we go from 64% to 75%. That's a big jump just from an efficiency standpoint. But what he shows for as we move forward, just like with everything, just like with the fire department, you're going to need more officers. Yep, we have 27 call takers, and if we're at par, we should be able to fill that. We should be at that 27 call takers, but you need that 30 call takers in order to. We always have people in training. And we just saw how many people are in and out of the training system, and by that, by 2 years, I think is what your report said. I'm trying to get the numbers in my head. Then it goes up an officer. 2 more years, it goes up another officer. So now we're planning. So I don't want to say this, but piggybacking off the fire department and their committee that they put together, that is something I'm thinking about, is taking the report that Mr. Friesmeier did, taking the information we have, and now strategically moving forward with this, not only making our department more efficient, but what do we need officer wise going forward? And today we're not going to say, well, 12 officers, that's what we need, and we have to make it happen. I have 2 in backgrounds right now. We put out for officer. It was open for 2 months, 45 people put in, and I ended up with 2. And only 6 people showed up to the testing. So that's, like Mr. Friesmeier was saying, that's the crunch we're in and the people that we're finding.
Okay. Enough.
Mr. Mayor, I have a comment.
Okay.
Thank you. So I guess from my perspective, opening meeting of the year, I talked amongst us in an administrative meeting that at some point we've got to prioritize the needs of the city. And for me, this is one of the top. In 2018, at the same time that the fire department came to the commission and asked for help with additional staffing for the fire department, so came HPPA. And at the time, they sent a letter to the commission and detailed the struggles that they have. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, in that year, fire department were given the authorization to go to the community for a levy. And I don't know how much we really have done for our police department. So for me, this is a very high priority. Totally supportive of forming a committee. Love to be on it, because I think we need to give these officers all the help we can, and happy to support any such effort. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this topic? Madam Clerk, do we have any online?
Mr. Mayor, I have no public comment on my.
Okay, thanks. Moving along. City County Board of Public Health update. Office, Public Health Officer Brenda Neiman, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Brenda Neiman again, Health Officer with Lewis and Clark Public Health. I'm going to do with a brief update on some work that's happening within the health department that I think is really important for city leadership to be tracking and understanding. And so the first big piece of update is relevant to all of our behavioral health work that's happening. There's a couple of intersections with the city that I'd like to point out. One is a new initiative, Communities That Care initiative. This is really reinvigorating the Youth Substance Use Prevention Coalition that many of you may have been aware of back several years ago, 10 years ago maybe, the Youth Connections Coalition, which did substance use prevention work within this community. The community sick care effort is a way to bring those community partners back together again. The key leaders, it's a multi-structure effort. So there's a key leader group, there's a community board group, and some work groups. The key leader group is starting to form now. There was an orientation with a handful just last week. It was recognized that there was not a city leader at the table, and Commissioner Dean's name came up within that conversation. And so I volunteered to bring it forward since I was going to be here today anyway. So this effort is really an opportunity to really work on reducing those risk factors and increasing those protective factors to improve health outcomes for kids. And the key leader responsibility is to support that community board in those work groups. And so it's probably be a quarterly meeting, intermittent email communications, and we would love to see city leadership join that key leader group. So I can follow up with potentially Commissioner Dean, who's shaking her. I'm happy to. In addition to that work that's happened, a lot of community coalition work there. Lewis and Clark Public Health is adding a couple of new positions. One is a substance use prevention coordinator. We received some grant funds to do that work. We'll be integrating substance use efforts into our overall behavioral health work that's happening in this community. We'll also be partnering with Peerview Health Center to deploy the a mobile unit to serve hard to reach populations around substance use and abuse, which is also a really nice complement to the opioid prevention work that we began. We are hiring a half-time coordinator to do opioid prevention work. We've started doing some outreach locally and within our 12-county region to start that opioid education and naloxone work. That's funded through graded or blended funding with grant funding as well as opioid settlement. So that really is the health department's effort to build that capacity needed to do the substance use work in our community. And the last piece of behavioral health update is relevant to our systems improvement work. Chief Petty has joined the systems improvement leadership team, and the charter's been updated to really focus in on those 3 pillars of the crisis continuum. So 988 crisis call center, the data showing that those calls are increasing, which is taking a little relief off of 911, is exactly what we want to see. The mobile crisis response team, we've been able to sustain that team. St. Peter's Hospital is the provider. Their staffing structure is starting to stabilize, which is all really great. And on the heels of the conversation we just had about law enforcement, takes some creates relief for our law enforcement partners because we have behavioral health specialists going on and providing service to those in crisis. The crisis stabilization facility, we're still in negotiations on contracts. So we went through the RFP process. Many Rivers, Whole Health, previously Center for Mental Health, we're looking to contract for that service. And so I think we're pretty close to having a contract negotiation done and a contract in place, and they'll work on staffing that crisis stabilization facility, previously the Journey Home, in that same location, and get those doors open so that we have a place for people to go in crisis. We are working on a data dashboard that will give you pretty real-time data on all 3 of those crisis pillars. So 988 mobile crisis response and crisis stabilization will be presented on a public-facing data dashboard, and that's coming soon. Next time I come to visit with a briefing, I'll should be able to show that to you. Any questions on the behavioral health piece so far? The other pieces are pretty quick. That was the biggest piece that I wanted to share was those behavioral health items.
How many beds will the
6.
well, 6?
It's a 6-bed, it's an 8-bed facility total. And some of those are voluntary and some are involuntary. It will be a bit because, as you heard from law enforcement, hiring is an issue and it's no different in the behavioral world. So trying to get that facility staffed up and those doors open, ready for service, we're looking at months out. So patience is a virtue.
I don't know about that.
The Journey Home's been closed since December of 2019. And so we're doing everything that we can in this community to open those doors back up again, but it has to be done in a way that is sustainable. So, and funding that service is really, really challenging.
I used to work there. The Journey.
Yeah.
You need a much job.
Much needed service. The local governing body, so this is the legislation to adopt rules and regulations that is recommended by the Board of Health. So it's this layer of approval that is required by law now. That local governing bodies bylaws have been adopted. Thank you, Mayor. Again, that local governing body consists of Mayor Collins, Commissioner Shurtleff on the city side. The county side, we have Chair Commissioner Rolfe, Commissioner Payne, and then East Helena Mayor Harris. Those 5 make up that local governing body. The only time that the local governing body is enacted or is when the Board of Health has rules and regulations that they either need to review, amend, and re-adopt, or if there's a need for a new regulation, and then if there's a need to replace the health officer. So hopefully that won't be any. So I put it on here because we have COVID-19 emergency rules and regulations still on the books. We were not able to do anything. The Board of Health couldn't do anything with those rules until this local governing body got up and running. And so we're going to put them to work right away. There's no rest for the weary. Legislatively, our Public Health State Association will be engaging in interim advocacy work around behavioral health, home visiting, immunizations, and licensed establishment fees. So just heads up that we will remain active in the interim in preparation for the 2025 legislative session. And then good news, we were able to submit all of our documentation for Public Health Accreditation Board reaccreditation in June. Hundreds of documents. I think last time I was here, or a few months back, here I let you know that we were working on that. Hundreds of documents that were needed to prove that the health department is in a place that we're ready to be reaccredited. So those have all been submitted, and now we're awaiting response from our National Accreditation Board, and a site visit hopefully will be scheduled this fall. So that's just a little bit of good news from the health department. All that work finally done and out the door. That's what I have for you today.
Thank you.
Any questions on what's happening at the health department? Your health department?
Comments from the commission? Do we have any public comments? Thank you, Ms. Newman.
We'll see you in a couple months.
I will readjust this agenda again because I know we have some people online and they've been online forever. So we are going to now go to D, Zipley franchise agreement. Attorney Doctor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. So this agenda item is the Zipley franchise agreement. It is a telecommunications agreement that's been negotiated through a consultant, Bob Duchin. He's the one online right now. This agreement would be for a company, Zipley Fiber, which has a representative online as well, Jessica Epley, both of whom will speak to this agreement, the work that they've done to negotiate an agreement, what it would do in the city of Helena, and then answer any questions that you would have. So I'll just turn this over to Bob if he's online. I see him here.
Becky, thank you. Mayor and members of the commission, thank you for having me today. I'm Bob Dushin, VP of River Oaks Communications Corporation. We are Colorado-based. We've been working very closely with Helena on these franchise negotiations with Ziply. Jessica Epley is joining us from Ziply. She's also probably on your screen there. And I just want to give you some of the highlights. And so members of the commission know we've worked closely with Helena on a number of other matters in the past. In this case, this is a non-exclusive franchise agreement. It's a 5-year agreement. It can be renewed for another 5 years if both parties agree down the line. The purpose of this agreement is so that Ziply can deploy its telecommunications facilities and the public rights of way in the city. Ziply intends to provide telecommunications and information services, internet services. The agreement has been negotiated back and forth to give the city what we feel are adequate protections in terms of the use of your public right of way. Ziply, to its credit, rather than just saying it only wanted to pull permits, has voluntarily agreed to enter into these negotiations. And I think we've come to an agreement which protects the best interests of the city and also allows Ziply to fulfill its business vision in terms of providing services throughout your community. With that, I would turn it over to Jessica, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the commission. I am Jessica Epley, the Vice President of Regulatory and External Affairs for Ziply Fiber. We're very excited to be expanding our telecommunications network outside of Lincoln County, where we serve today as the incumbent telephone carrier, to the great city of Helena. We had an opportunity to meet with several members of city staff last week to walk through a very robust communications plan. We have an approach that we think is unique in this space in that we're taking a build big and build once approach. If approved, this franchise will enable Ziply to conduct construction this year, covering approximately 7,000 addresses within the city limits of Helena. And these are addresses that are currently served by aerial utilities. So there are Northwestern Energy utility poles we would be attaching to those poles. In 2024, we would come back and address the remainder of the city where there are underground utilities. And we've had some robust discussions thus far, much more for us to have in the future about how that construction can take place in a very mindful and very respectful way to ensure the integrity of the roads and that services are deployed as rapidly as possible to your constituents. We do offer a number of low-income programs to help with affordability, but our base prices begin at $20 a month. So really very excited to get started. Hope that the commission can find a way to approve this franchise in its upcoming meeting, and happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. And comments from the commission. Do we have any?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Did you mention you're using, instead of building towers, you're using power lines or you're using power poles?
We will be attaching to existing utility poles where you have utility poles in the city.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any public comments?
I have none online.
Attorney Doctor, I'm turning it back over to you.
That's all we have. Thank you. We will be appearing before you on this Monday's commission meeting for official approval for the agreement. And so if you have any questions, we'll be there as well.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's move on back to board appointment review. Board appointment, ADA compliance committee, city, county, regional airport. I'm recommending the following board appointment: ADA compliance committee, appointment of Jacob Krasovich to an interim term on the ADA compliance board as disabled citizen representative. Interim term will begin at September 1st, 2024. I'm also recommending city, county, regional airport authority, appointment of Jason Davis to an interim term on the city, county, regional airport authority as a joint appointee. Interim term will expire September 1st, 2024. Comments or questions from the commission? Public comments. Moving along. Recommendations from Helena Citizens Council, Representative John Andrews and or Cole Ross. We have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. No recommendations from the HCC right now, but just a couple of things. We're surveying our members right now for priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. And the second thing we're doing, understand we've got new members one from District 4 and one from District 5, and we'll be meeting with them in the meeting this July.
Comments for Mr. Andrews from the commission? Thank you, sir. City Manager's report.
Mayor, I'd be very brief. Turn it over to Director Danielson to give you an update on fees coming forward for your consideration.
Thank you, Manager Burton. I just wanted the commission to know that at Monday's commission meeting, it's going to be a pretty full agenda. It is our annual time to bring resolutions of intention to the commission for all of our assessments and most of our rates. So I just wanted to, let you know in advance that they're queued up and we'll be presenting them one by one. It may take a little time, but we'll try to be as expeditious as possible.
Bring the dinner, guys. Danae, we're buying.
Oh, okay.
Is that it? That's it, man. Burton. Okay, department reports, general fund saving update. Director Danielson, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm trying to get this up on the screen. So thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. This is just an update from the last time that the commission met in an administrative meeting and discussed their priorities or their suggestions for general fund savings disbursements. And so we formulated that information, and thank you, Commissioner Dean, for your work on that as well. And giving it to us so that we can incorporate it into this presentation. Just a little brief history. We've already passed several resolutions distributing general fund savings. There was resolution 20782 that distributed with the exception of putting into a reserve, but $5.2 million with 1.6 put into a reserve amount. Resolution 20788 distributed $464,000. Resolution 2082 distributed $1.8 million. But then also within that grand total, we retracted $150,000 for the wildland truck because the insurance paid quite a bit of the repairs. I don't have the actual resolution number, but there was a resolution passed on June 26th for pool operations so that they could maintain their pool operations for the rest of this current season as we review their operational structure and sustainability. And that lives total allocation to date of $7.7 million. The current balance of our original allocation amount was $775,900, and there still remains $1.6 million in a reserve that was set aside. After formulating all the commissioners' requests, Commissioner Dean, and these are all in your packet, so I'm not going to walk through every single one of them. She recommended allocating almost $1.79 million. And Commissioner Logan as well replicated Commissioner Dean's request. So this was both Commissioner Dean and Commissioner Logan's request for disbursements. Commissioner Reed had requested $975,000 in disbursements. I will indicate that she also noted that the distribution recommendation to Family Promise, she still wants to make sure that there's that caveat that before any funds would be dispersed to that program, that there would be a more robust application that would be submitted for that particular project. Commissioner Shurtleff recommended a little over $1 million in disbursements. And Mayor, you recommended $811,000 in disbursements. So I hope I captured the meeting correctly. And if there's any discrepancy, please let me know. I went ahead and just tried to consolidate that information and noted if there was 5 out of 5 mayor and commissioners that voted for something, they're noted in green. So you'll see that 5 out of 5 of you recommended a distribution to Case Kids, to the Powwow organization, the Family Promise organization, Good Samaritan organization, and for the distribution for a public restroom in the downtown area. 4 out of the 5 panel recommended money to go to a comprehensive recreational plan, distribution to exploration works, and a distribution for a city to, make our city solar project a little bit more robust, getting, maybe 1 or 2 more solar projects on city properties to conserve energy. And then there was 2 commissioners that also asked to have distributions. Commissioner Dean and Logan also requested to have distributions to our actual solar loan program to residents here in the city of Helena, and also to the Helena Regional Sports Authority, distributions from Commissioner Shurtleff and Mayor Collins. And I think that covers them all. Oh, I'm sorry. 3 out of the panel asked for distributions to the warming hut, for the ice rink, and also to allocate some money to the sidewalk loan program as well. This just summarizes that 5 out of all 5 commissioners proposed funding, and I just took an average of what your allocation recommendations were for here, the Last Chance Powwow, Good Samaritan Adult Day Program, the Downtown Public Restroom, Family Promise Shelter, and Case Kids all had some recommendation from the panel. There was 4 commissioners that recommended distributions to the comprehensive recreational plan, distribution to exploration works, and the city solar project. Again, these are just, I took whatever, like if Commissioner Dean wanted 150,000 and Commissioner Shurtleff wanted 200,000, I just took an average of those that voted on it, and that's what these numbers represent. 3 commissioners voted for distributing some money to the ice rink warming hut and to the sidewalk loan program. And 2 commissioners recommended distribution to the Helena Regional Sports Authority and the solar loan program. And where I'm at today is a recommendation from the commission to move forward with any further funding allocations at this time, or is there some other information that you will need for future meetings that I can put together? And we could, if you wanted to make a consensus tonight on any funding, we can bring a pending resolution to the August 7th, 2023 meeting, or we can wait for Commissioner Reed to return and I can bring this presentation back at that time with any further information that you might need so that you can continue the discussion at that time. And that's all I have.
And so waiting for Commissioner Reed, when will be the next time? We got to get this funding to the different entities. As much as I respect everybody, but we've been dragging our feet on this forever and ever. We need to make something happen. So if we were to wait, when can this be on the agenda at the closest, the next meeting? When next can we put this on the agenda and make final decisions?
It would be at the next administrative meeting again, if all the commissioners, I'm not sure what that date is.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, yes, August 2nd is the next administrative meeting. However, I believe Commissioner Reed said due to another work obligation, she may likely have to miss that meeting as well.
But I think we should just go ahead and do whatever we can.
So, Mr.
I'm going to recommend those projects that have 5 votes. I'm going to recommend we move forward with those.
Can we go back to that slide, please?
No, not that slide.
Not that slide.
No,
Well, I'm
this
fine.
slide you have right there.
Okay.
I'm recommending those with 5 votes should move forward.
Okay.
So, and that would include an average, or because there are items where the dollar.
Yeah, I know, and they're different dollars. My recommendation is average. I don't know where the other commissioners stand.
I think I could get on board with that. I would even go so far as to say maybe even the average of those that 4 or 5 commissioners supported, because that gets I think over half of them. Yeah, well over half of them move forward, and then we can have additional discussions.
Yeah, can we do 5 and 4?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, but I think we should move forward.
So how much money are we talking if we're looking at 5 and 4?
For the average,
I knew you were gonna make me do math. I don't have a calculator.
you can send us that math, you can send us that math later.
I will send you the math.
I mean, well, and I guess, Mr. Mayor, I'd say we're still well under, even if we said everything got funded, we're still well under that top amount with the reserve right now.
Yes, and Mayor and Commissioner Dean, I might, there was a question as to, and I think it was Commissioner Reed that have proposed, is there a cap amount that this commission wants to set for distributing any money, and what is that cap? Or should we?
I think that that's a good question. I don't think we're gonna answer that here today. But it's a question that will, when are we done?
Let's hurry up and get this thing done, then we're done.
So, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Dean, sounds like you're kind of on top of the numbers. So given the 5 and 4 there, what would be in reserve?
Well, just to give you an idea, we'd be at, so if we have 1.6 available plus, let's say, 775. And if you even just look at mine, the only one I'm missing is HRSA, which I'm open to having that conversation later too. I mean, I think that's one of those we can hold off. So I mean, I'm still well under, and I am at 1.7.
Mayor and Commissioners, my colleague did the math for me. And if we take an average of both 4 and 5, it would distribute $920,600.
So we're still good.
Okay. So commissioners, consensus? Everyone's good.
Maybe after we take public comment, but yes.
Okay, we'll open up for the public comments. Commissioner, you know how to stall time. Nobody.
Mr. Mayor, I have no public comment on that.
Okay, any final comments? Okay, you have consensus, Director Danielson.
Yes, Mayor, we will bring a resolution to the commission on, August 7th meeting to distribute $920,600.
Thank you. Preliminary discussion of draft ordinance to adopt 2021 International Fire Code. Chief, sorry, I thought you guys were done, but then this thing comes.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, again, good evening. Fire Marshal Lou Antonick is going to provide a brief presentation on the update to fire code, the 2012 version 2021, and he's promised to be assistant.
Mayor and Commission, thank you. I'll be quick. So we're moving from the 2012 International Fire Code to the 2021 International Fire Code. This is something that's been a long time coming. We had to wait until the state of Montana adopted the 2021 Fire Code, which they did in March of 2023. So after they adopted, we were able to move forward with that. This is something that's happening across the state. All of us are collectively working on this. Billings, Great Falls, Bozeman, just to name a few, and which is kind of helpful because it gives us the opportunity to be able to kind of collaborate on that. So State of Montana Administrative Rule 2312-601, which establishes that, and then the code applies to new construction as required in the building code, but it also applies to the existing conditions. So one of the big differences between the building code and the fire code is that the fire code is responsible for the existing buildings. And the chief talked about that earlier, about the 1,600 inspections that we have across the city. Next slide, please. It's a model code, regulates just minimum fire safety. And what I always tell people is it's buildings, facilities, and processes both for occupants in there as well as firefighters. Significant changes. I'll talk about some of those with the International Fire Code 2021. Fire prevention, fire protection, life safety, hazardous materials in new and existing buildings and facilities. So we're using the code across the city, both for the inspection process, but there's also pieces that apply to the investigation process as well. The code is used for both new construction, plan review, and existing buildings. The bulk of the chapters apply to both. We spend the majority of our time on the first 11 chapters of the International Fire Code. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we're adopting, this is pretty common across the state with the municipalities. The state of Montana does not issue permits. We issue permits in the city for open burning. Most of the open burning that we're doing is specific to the governmental entities like the NRC, the Forest Service, when they're doing work on public lands. Fireworks, blasting, we do have some blasting that happens in the city. You'll probably see some of that with the West Side development. There'll be a significant amount of blasting that happens there. And then open flame devices, obviously with the wildland urban interface or wildland. Something you may hear about that's pretty significant is the food trucks have to comply to the same regulations as restaurants. So they have to have a type 1 hood and they have to have a fire extinguishing system, which is something that's been pretty significantly discussed across the country with the amount of fires that have happened both inside of facilities, next to facilities. So what we're doing is across the state, the decision has been made to begin that process May 1st of 2024. I would say the bulk of the food trucks that we see in Helena have those systems in place already, but there are some that do not. Where required in existing buildings and structures is not adopted. That's huge. There was a lot of controversy surrounding that. This is the Station nightclub fire that happened in Rhode Island in 2003. So there's been a big push across the country with the International Fire Code, National Fire Protection Association to get sprinkler systems. But with existing buildings, we don't have as many of the 300 occupant load buildings, but some of the other cities like Billings and Great Falls do. So it became pretty controversial about having them to retrofit an existing sprinkler system inside of those buildings. So they chose to take that out. At the state level, municipalities adopted that same thing. Door operations is pretty significant. I put that one in there because there's a lot of discussion across the country with lockdown active shooter in the schools. And there's been a significant amount of discussion about that with the fire code. One of the things that happens is there's, security versus safety with some of the other things that can happen. For example, in Helena with the seismic zone that we're in, D, with earthquakes, for example. So that discussion about locking devices in school systems. And so what they wanted to do in Montana, which I think is a great idea, is they wanted to clarify that a bit more. Next slide. These are some of the local amendments that we've made. Knox boxes, those are critical for us to be able to respond. I always tell people 2:30 in the morning. So any of the existing buildings or new buildings where we have fire and life safety systems, for us to be able to get in there. One of the dilemmas that we run into, which is problematic both for response to other incidents, is waiting around for a responsible party to show up. So Knox boxes are critical. We require them on new construction on every building, and we're also adding Knox boxes because the buildings are getting bigger, excuse me. Fire sprinkler systems require notification and monitoring throughout as part of the fire alarm system. So the Albertsons fire that we had on North Montana Avenue, the occupants in there didn't even realize there was a fire in the back of the building because there was no notification devices, which was common to allow a sprinkler system without notification. So monitoring delays the fire department's ability. We're waiting for somebody to call 911. Obviously, we don't want to have people unaware of what's going on inside of some of these buildings. Hose valves, we cleaned up some language there because we like to operate on the intermediate level without going into a lot of detail. That's a safer place for firefighters to be able to operate when you're in stair towers and buildings. All fire alarm systems have to be monitored. That's significant. A lot of the older fire alarm systems are what are called local alarm, meaning that if they're not monitored, again, we're waiting for a passerby or somebody to call 911. Addressable fire alarm panels instead of conventional. It's important to have that because we have a lot of controversy with the fire alarm contractors on bidding addressable systems versus conventional. Conventional is old zone stuff that everybody wants to get away from. A lot of the manufacturers aren't even making it anymore. So we're just making it across the board in Helena to have an addressable system and not a conventional panel. And it's important for the fire department too to be able to pinpoint. Carbon monoxide comes in as an alarm and not a supervisory. In Helena, we've done this for quite a long time. We just chose to put it in the ordinance. It's important to have that because we have so many instances with carbon monoxide alarms where they don't call 911 if it's supervisory. If it goes to alarm status, that means it's automatic through a monitoring.
What do you mean supervisory?
So panel has trouble supervisory and alarm. Supervisory is something that's local. So if you have a fire alarm panel at the front desk, for example, in a hotel, and something comes in as a supervisory, the fire department's unaware because it's just being handled by staff inside of the building. If it goes into alarm, that's a monitoring company that's contracted and then they call dispatch. Next slide, please. These are some of the new chapters. International Fire Code, I think, did a good job of really cleaning some stuff up and tightening stuff and giving us more information to be able to handle some of the stuff that we're running into. So a lot of energy systems, you guys were just talking about solar. So all of the solar stuff, generators, things like that. It has got its own chapter now. Higher education laboratories is critical. We have laboratories at Carroll College, the VOTEC, and both the high schools. And there's a significant concern with safety at those laboratories. So this gives us more ability to be able to manage those laboratories, to be able to put effective processes in place. Chapter 39 is processing and extraction facilities. We don't have any of the processing and extraction facilities. Some of the other cities are dealing with this right now. Mainly what we have is just distribution. Chapter 40 is distilled spirits and wines. That is consistently taken off with the different distilleries. So Chief Billing Official Kim Mack and I spent a bit of time talking about those as well. Next slide, please. So these are the appendix that we've adopted. Board of Appeals is not adopted because we already have a city ordinance that has a Board of Appeals process, and then it has people that are assigned as a part of that. Fire flow requirements has been in there for a long time. That's how we calculate sprinklers and hydrants and the number of hydrants. Same with Appendix C. Appendix D is huge, which is, you've heard a lot about, it's the fire apparatus access stuff. Appendix E is just information only. Appendix S is, or F, excuse me, is our hazard ranking. So most of these are either something that provides more information for those chapters, or it's something that supplements some of those chapters. Next slide. Question.
Mission?
That is a high flying view of fire code. I could bore you for a week.
No, please don't. Comments from the commission? Do we have any public comments?
I have none on my list here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Okay, we have board work session, administrative follow-up. Clerk of the commission, Danae Glenmore.
Comment, Mr.
Yeah,
Mayor.
brief version.
Yes, sir.
6 o'clock. Overtime. Please look out for us. Anything after 6, that's overtime, right?
Yeah, where's Renee at?
Where's our CAD system?
So, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I'll make this as fast as possible. I think I would indicate that Dan Clark and Ashley Kemp from the Local Government Center have been sitting through the entirety of this meeting, so they are here to respond to any questions regarding the letter that you spoke about earlier. As I said, that letter is also included in the packet for the public's edification. Briefly, we'll run through how we got here. On June 20th, there was a board's work session where we talked about various bits of information, direction and processes, both governance and administrative for the commissions, boards and committees. Follow up from that meeting, I need a little bit more information from all of you regarding 3 main areas so that we can move forward internally. And those 3 areas are listed here on the screen. First, the standardized bylaws. Those bylaws were included as part of that packet on June 20th, a templated version that we would then apply to several boards that were indicated in the memo, the staff report within your packet. Resolution review and revision. That process had already begun last year due to the Citizens Conservation Board sunsetting in January of last year. So we sort of sped up a little faster than I would have preferred in that resolution process. So as you can see here, I would like to restart that review again, and then go back and review the 2 resolutions that were completed last year to make sure that they align with the commission's current direction. And then lastly, we did have an elected official discussion at that meeting. And we discussed whether or not commission members should sit on your own advisory boards. You chose at that meeting to remove commission seats from your general advisory boards unless otherwise indicated in statute or code. However, you did state that you were comfortable with moving forward with seats remaining on the existing HCC seats on various general advisory boards. So we'll maybe go a little bit more into that as we move forward, since I'm hearing a little bit different information this evening. On the standardized bylaws, I indicate here that we're following a model out of Santa Monica, California. I was over the moon excited to see that we are not alone in this process. They actually did a very parallel process to what we've done here internally, where they've looked at best practices, and they actually went in a method where they took a standardized bylaws resolution and had the commission adopt this resolution. I've discussed this matter with the city attorney's office, and they indicated that this would be their recommendation as well. So we'll move forward in the next month's commission meetings to have you adopt that draft set of bylaws that you approved at the 20th work session as those general advisory boards standardized bylaws. And then we'll take that document forward to the various committees and boards you see on the screen here for their formal adoption. Do you have any questions there? I'm speaking quickly for a reason.
What reason?
I was told to. Resolution review and revision. As I indicated earlier, we started that process a little faster than I would have liked ideally. And so I'd like to go back to the Helena Public Art Committee and Citizens Conservation Board just to confirm that we're following the commission's latest direction. And we may have to bring those resolutions back for some ministerial changes or revision on that language. The other boards that were indicated at a discussion with you all last year that have not been reviewed are the Golf Advisory Board, Non-Motorized Transportation Advisory Council, and Helena Open Lands Management Advisory Committee. And so we would bring those resolutions up, speak with staff internally, put the templated resolution that we showed you at the June work session forward for discussion at an admin meeting, and then ultimately adoption if you choose to do so. Any questions there? So we've had a lot of questions from staff, from some of you, actually, just making sure that we're following a clean process. And it occurred to me that we had never really gone through with you at one of these meetings, a step-by-step on how the application process works. So for staff and the public that may be still hanging in there, I wanted to walk through very quickly how we do the application process for your general advisory boards and even some of the administrative or quasi-judicial boards. Essentially, there's an application submitted. We do a review internally just for information that isn't filled out on the form, and then make sure that this form appears to be valid. The deputy clerk then checks references. They're contacted. Those references are compiled along with all the applications for the mayor to review and in a booklet. So one of the questions that has been asked of me is, are we seeing all of the applications that come through for each and every board? That was a couple of you asked me that question. The answer is yes. If you don't see the non-selected by the mayor, it's because there was only one applicant that applied. So you will see all of the applicants, and we set aside in your packet of materials those applicants that the mayor has chosen per his duties in the city charter. And then we have a discussion period at one of these admin meetings. That's your opportunity to ask questions of the mayor or of staff on the applications, and then you give consensus approval to move that appointment forward at the next regular commission meeting or next available agenda. You can vote that appointment up or down. Any questions there? So what we tried to do for the application process for HCC was pretty much align that with the existing application process. And I guess I would pause here before we move forward any further and ask if you would like to discuss this letter that you brought up earlier before we move forward. Or would you like me to run through the whole application process that we're proposing for the HCC?
I don't see any reason for the letter, but to discuss or yes.
Well, I guess just to clarify, Madam Clerk, you're saying if the commission as a whole is considering a different direction, so not HCC appointed positions on some of these boards, and instead ask them to, assign someone to go and participate as a member of the public and then report back rather than voting, etc.
Correct.
We wouldn't need this comp piece.
Correct. So, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Dean, what I heard earlier is that there was a discussion about whether or not this was the direction at least two of the commissioners were interested in going forward with. So before I move forward in this process, I guess I'd like to know if there's questions you'd like to ask the local government center or myself. Otherwise, I'll just continue on.
I guess, Mr. Mayor, I guess I'd just like to say that based on, the information provided by the local government center. Even though at the meeting in June, I was sympathetic to the public that was present, those HCC members, and it made sense at that particular moment. I think we have better information now that might not have been a best practice. So I don't know. I guess I would say that I don't know that I'm supportive of what we sort of gave consensus approval for at that time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I haven't read through all the bullets there. I don't know if that impacts what you're proposing here on this slide.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Logan, it doesn't impact the process that we're going to propose, but in the interest of time, I wanted to give that discussion.
That's kind of where I'm at. I'm uncomfortable with that now.
Yeah, that's where I was at the last meeting, and I said this at the last admin meeting. I think the HCC is one of the cooler things about our charter, but I also think that that's the reason it exists and the reason our advisory boards exist. And I don't necessarily think that I think the local government center memo also says this, that we don't get necessarily better recommendations by having a member of one board on another board. So an HCC member on open rooms, for example. That does not mean that HCC's recommendations aren't important, because they are. It just means that we need to ensure that we have a broad perspective of opinions and backgrounds that aren't overlapping. The overlapping piece is not best practice, is essentially what the local government center has said, and I agree with that.
Commissioner Sherman.
Yeah, it's, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. This is something I've heard on some of the advisory boards of, someone's on HCC, but they're also part of another advisory board. However, advisory boards are not established to advise other advisory boards. You can build consensus, and I agree with Commissioner Dean, having a wide variety of points of view. I think that diversity makes us stronger and makes these boards better, but having multiple people and I don't want to say dilutes, but it removes an opportunity for someone else to serve. So not saying that person's not qualified, they might be eminently qualified to be that person, but I think it might take away an opportunity for someone else this.
Okay, so one of the bullet points that jumps out at me from the local government center's letter is it is important to recognize the local government structure of three separate but equal branches: legislative, executive, and the commission is the legislature. Commission is the legislative branch and utilizes the advisory board structure to help it make informed decisions, allowing an advisory board with sole advisory function to operate as a separate board with authority, such as independent appointment authority, when it would in effect create a fourth branch of government outside the enabling resolution. This is not recommended as a part of the governance structure suggested practices. So there's just a number of things that I'm uncomfortable about. The process that's sort of organically evolved over time here. So, thank you.
Madam Clerk, I think we do have a consensus to move forward with what we've heard about the communications from the local government.
God's throwing his voice again.
Yeah, I think we have a consensus as to the recommendations from the local government center.
Okay, so what I just want to confirm what I'm hearing. So at this time, we'll not move forward with HCC appointments on the commission boards at all. So we will pause on that. But you are comfortable with moving forward the bylaws process and that adopted resolution at an August meeting, and then that resolution process beginning again.
Yes.
Okay, well, then, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, unless you have any other questions regarding the other two bullet points from earlier, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. That's all I have.
Do you think those guys want to say a few words or anything? Mr. Clark and Ashley?
Certainly. So I don't know if Ashley or Dan, would you like to speak on behalf of the local government centers recommendations?
Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to provide this letter and to work with you on this matter. It's helped with some clarification with some other conversations that we're having around the state that are very similar. We are here simply as a resource for you to answer any clarifying questions, anything that may not make sense out of that letter. Don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, are you done with your report?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I am done with my report.
Are there any public comments for this?
Yeah, if I might, Mr. Mayor and Commission. John R. Andrew with HCC. I haven't been privy to the discussions that have occurred between some of, I think, the executive committee and the HCC and members of the commission about appointments in this. I haven't been privy to that, but I know there's been concern with the HCC. And I'm not familiar with this correspondence from the Local Government Study Commission, nor do I know if Cole Rosling or any of the executive board of the HCC has seen this, but I guess I'm just going to comment that if there was an understanding at one point that's different than what's coming about now, that could create a communication issue. And I would hope that the HCC isn't kind of left in the lurch about what is happening here, if that makes sense. And again, I'm not privy to everything that's been discussed, but it sounds to me like there's sort of this is a reversal of something that was discussed previously, I'm assuming with HCC's consent.
That's correct.
So I voice it, I guess, just to say it, I guess.
And I guess, Mr. Mayor, quick question. I don't know, I'm not really sure how HCC distributes the work, but do you have a particular representative that reviews our agenda packets about what we're going to be discussing?
I don't have any knowledge of that. I wasn't actually even supposed to be at this meeting. I was substituting for Pat Vick. So
you can be at any meeting.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. Yeah, I understand.
But we did distribute the communications with the meeting package. So
yeah.
the agenda. So
okay. And I may just be missing that, but like I say, I'm just voicing the concern.
Gotcha.
Mr. Mayor, I think Mr. Andrew makes a good point that probably would be best to reach out. And because, there was significant, five members or so from the HCC that came to the last meeting. And based on, the public testimony that we made, set a certain direction. But like I say, we've since gotten some better information than we had at the last meeting. And I think
to the shunt line.
And I think that it's makes sense to reach out to them and let them know of this updated information. I mean, even though it's been published in the packet.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea, Commissioner.
And Mr. Mayor and Commissioner, if I might, I'm not sure if Cole is still online or not, but I know he's got a bad head cold right now, so he may have left, and he would be more privy to some of the questions that you've asked me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I'm happy to facilitate whatever manner you feel is most appropriate to let the HCC know. I might recommend a formal letter from the commission or commission members attending their next HCC meeting. I'm open to whatever the commission would like.
You can do the letter and also add the communications from the center.
And Mr. Just one more note. I don't think any of us have made this comment, and so if folks haven't read the letter that's in the, or the memo that's in the agenda packet, they wouldn't know. But I would urge everybody to read the best practices letter from the local government center. But it does discuss in their best practices that they would encourage a body like the HCC to appoint their own members to participate in the advisory committees. So as a member of the public, going and knowing what is being discussed at these, but not sitting as a formal voting member, because they, like in their recommendation, there's a risk of reducing the representation for all citizens and eroding the effectiveness when you have the same people on multiple boards. I hope that summarizes.
Are you clear?
I believe so, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, Manager Burton. Do you have any questions of us?
Mayor, I don't.
Are you clear?
Yeah.
Thank you. At this time, is there anyone from the public wishes to address the commission? Do we have any online?
Mr. Mayor, commissioners, I have no public comment on that.
Thank you, Commissioners. Any final comments? This meeting is adjourned. We'll be 20 minutes over time.
Yeah.